So, in order to understand the history of virtual reality, you have to understand what virtual reality is first. Virtual reality is a computer-generated world where the user interfaces with it in a way that they generally wouldn't be able to interface with the real world. This was just a fictional concept for many years. Authors in the early 1900s wrote about it, but it became a limited reality in 1956 when Morton Heilig invented the Sensorama. The Sensorama was essentially an arcade cabinet that simulated sights, sounds, other stimulations like wind blowing. It was very limited in what it could do, but it was the first virtual reality. It was the first time that people could really escape into something where they felt like they were there. The same man in 1962 also invented the first head-mounted display for virtual reality, which allowed the viewer to see certain pictures in 3D, like they were actually there with depth of vision and so on and so forth. The Sword of Damocles was a improvement on this. It was made in 1968, and it was the first virtual reality and augmented reality head-mounted display. It was essentially the same type of goggles, except it actually enhanced the world around those people. 1973 was the first time we get artificial reality as a term. It was coined by the Dr. Myron Kruger. Late 1970s, multiplayer games are on the rise. This is the first use of social virtual reality. The first time where people in a virtual setting collaborate, compete. You see this in the first first-person shooter, which was made in 1974, called Maze Run, or multi-user dungeon, where players would create dungeons in which other players could compete. In the early 1980s, you start to see some innovation in the interface of it. In 1982, the VPL data glove is made, which is a glove that fits around the user's hand that allows them to interact with the artificial world in a way that they wouldn't be able to with a mouse. Unfortunately, it was prohibitively expensive, and it never really caught steam. But Lucasfilm in 1986 also made a very important jump in introducing the first type of Second Life, the first real virtual world. Users could make their own names, have an avatar, and they could interact with other users in the program. In the 1990s, you begin to see in these virtual worlds an increasing complexity, and it culminates in 1997's Active Worlds, which was the first truly 3D rendered world in which users could assign themselves unique names and avatars and interact with that world as they would with the real one. In the 2000s, you start to see these worlds become increasingly complex and more versatile. For example, World of Warcraft became a huge social form of interaction for its players. It gathered millions of people into their membership where they could collaborate and compete. Second Life also saw the true interaction with a virtual world in the way that one would interact with the real world. It even had real world currency and business meetings conducted in it.
And that will lead into the technologies currently in use today. Virtual reality is now seeming more practical than ever, and thus being improved and revolutionized constantly. There are many devices used today on the market for immersion, one notable example being the Oculus Rift, a set of goggles that give the viewer a nearly all-encompassing and perspective view of the virtual environment. The Oculus Rift has been noted as being so realistic that people actually have to rip it off because it is so immersive, as you'll probably see.
Dude, no.
It is also very inexpensive for what it is capable of, and it is giving strength to the concept of virtual reality. Augmented reality is getting a boost as well. The product called Google Glass is already in beta testing. Google Glass is a small visor with an eyepiece that is essentially a wearable screen for the everyday world. So essentially a cell phone interface that you wear all the time and you can access with voice and gesture commands. Online virtual worlds are skyrocketing in popularity, with sometimes millions of players interacting, competing, and collaborating in various ways. Games such as World of Warcraft, Minecraft, and the soon-to-be popular Destiny are just some of the many examples of this online virtual community. The future of simulated worlds and senses is coming very soon. Already there are technologies being invented that could essentially replace real life. For example, there are contact lenses that are already in testing, have the ability to manipulate pixels, and eventually will be able to be high definition enough to fool someone into thinking that it is actually real life. There's also more concepts of the Google Glass, which again could bring augmented reality to a very front in society. And even the possibility of altering our own dreams is becoming an invention that people are thinking about.
Alright, now that we've talked about the past, present, and future of virtual reality, we've got to go into some of the potential problems that it can go into. As it is a developing technology, it's also going to have current and future problems that can develop along with the technology. Some of the current problems include the scientific use of it as it is today. What we use for today is mainly like looking at models and things of architecture and whatnot that we can't really interact with in the real world. And this isn't exactly a representation of what it is like in the real world because of our computing power and whatnot, our limitations. There's always lurking variables that happen in the real world as opposed to what's happening in the virtual world. Continuing with the trend of hindering technologies, a lot of head-mounted displays, or HMDs, today are based off the movement of head. So if I look to my left, I see something to my left. If I look to my right, I see something to my right. But in reality, people don't look at things that way. They look with their peripheries and not by moving their eyes. And computers, as of today, cannot really detect that. So if I'm using an HMD and I look to my left with my eyes, and the computer can't detect that, and there's some computational error about what's there, it can mess up what I'm seeing as well, and it can cause what is known as cyber sickness. An analogy to this would be watching a movie and where the audio doesn't sync up with the lips. To end with the current issues, there have been a lot of technological failures in the field of virtual reality. Andrew's touched on a lot of them. There are things like the Sensorama that he talked about. It wasn't really failed, it just kind of didn't really catch on. Nintendo Power Glove, I mean look at this kid, look how cool he could be. And then things like the Virtusphere, I mean look at those tights, like how could that fail? I don't even know. But on the topic, as technology develops, things are going to become more realistic, virtual worlds are going to be even better, and that is going to allow us to be even more enveloped into what they're bringing to the table. And this in itself is going to bring along more ethical and like societal issues. So,
I mean, just imagine how doing something as simple as going out to a social party is going to be in the future with virtual reality.
Hey dude, you going to the party tonight?
Yeah, man, coming right now.
Alright man, see you there. Turn up. So some of the future problems. Well-known inventor and futurist Ray Kurzweil predicts that within the next couple of decades, we're going to have nanobots that are actually interacting directly with our brains. This technology and computing power is going to allow us to literally be in what we can see as a super hyper-realistic virtual world. And this is where a lot of problems come in. Something like virtual criminality is going to be a potential biggie. It might be hard to imagine, but what if someone were to commit a criminal act within their virtual environment. And a scenario could be where a bunch of people were within their own virtual environment, and some of them were affected or traumatized, possibly even injured, due to the actions of one of the individuals. The questions really come down to whether you can actually feel pain or be traumatized by an action that seems so real, even though it's in a virtual world. This is where the extent of the technology comes in, how real it really is, how much it interacts with our brains, as Kurzweil predicted. And this also raises other questions. How would they be punished? Would there be a force within the virtual world, like the police officers, law enforcement, and whatnot? Or would they be punished in the real world? It just leads up so many questions. One of the most important issues is going to be the linkage between virtual reality and the aspect of desensitization. This aspect could mean that we become not as influenced by really violent acts, any fear, or like any other human emotions. The problem this comes in when you're put back into the real world. For example, in a virtual world, it's very controlled. You wouldn't come across like a tiger or something in the virtual world in the sense that it can be controlled. You wouldn't be confronted with some things that are very considered dangerous. And even then, you might even know that it's a virtual world. You might not exactly feel the same fear as you would in the real world. This hyper-realistic virtual reality could also lead to something known as cyber addiction. Think of being addicted to video games in a sense. Think of WALL-E even. This addiction could lead to more time spent within the virtual world, which could lead to adverse effects in the reality. The disadvantages that I've talked about here are minute in comparison to the actual advantages that could be achieved through virtual reality. But a lot of the issues that we talked about are very important, and we need to find a way to perfect those and reduce those issues in order for virtual reality to be used to its full potential.